Michael Jackson is officially the most famous human being to ever walk the earth. And almost nobody making videos about him actually explains how that happened. Because the real story starts decades before Thriller in a cramped house in Gary, Indiana, where a kid named Michael barely got to be a kid at all. His father, Joe Jackson, ran the household like a talent agency. And rehearsal was not optional, it was the entire point of childhood. So while other 5-year-olds were learning how to ride a bike, Michael was already learning harmony, footwork, and timing under a man who scared him. He admitted this himself years later, saying his father terrified him to the point where just a look across the room could make him feel sick. And there were nights his mother had to scream at Joe to stop because she thought he might actually hurt him. That fear is the foundation of everything that came after, because by the time the Jackson 5 broke out, Michael wasn't just the lead singer, he was the product, the engine, the reason people were buying tickets, and he had a #1 record before he was even old enough to fully understand what fame was going to cost him. People love to romanticize this part of the story, the poor kid from Indiana who became a star. But what actually happened is that his childhood was quietly removed in exchange for a career he knew. But then Thriller dropped, and that's where this stopped sounding like a normal music career and starts sounding made up. 8 Grammys in one single night. An album that became the best-selling record of all time, with numbers north of 66 million copies sold. On a planet that was still racially divided in its own radio rotation, where black artists were regularly shut out of mainstream rock stations and barely touched by MTV, Michael Jackson didn't just top the charts, he kicked a door down that the entire industry had built specifically to keep people like him out. Then came the moonwalk, one performance, on one television special, one impossible-looking glide backward across the stage, and the entire planet had a before and after moment in real time. On paper, this is the fairy tale part, the underdog who becomes the biggest entertainer alive. Fashion icon, 2 inductions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a Grammy Legend Award, the whole resume. But here's the part fairy tales conveniently skip. Once you're at that altitude, you stop being a person the public watches and you start becoming something the public feels like they own. He didn't just become famous, he became something closer to global property. And property doesn't get vacations. This is where the story stops being inspiring and starts getting uncomfortable, because everyone remembers what happened to Michael's appearance and his public image over the years, but almost nobody actually sits down and asks the harder question. His look changed. His voice got softer. His public behavior got stranger to people watching from the outside, and the tabloids gave him a nickname for it. One specifically built to turn a complicated human being into a punchline, calling him Wacko Jacko. And he hated it, he said so directly on camera more than once, telling interviewers flat out that he had feelings and that nickname wasn't nice. Please don't have a term for this. It's the gap between your public self and your private self, and an extreme long-term fame. That gap doesn't stay small. It turns into something closer to a cage. There was Michael, the kid who genuinely loved animals, amusement parks, and Peter Pan stories, and there was Michael Jackson, the symbol, built piece by piece by magazine covers and talk show hosts who had never actually had a real conversation with him. He said himself that friendship was something he was still trying to learn as an adult, because he was raised entirely on a stage, and everywhere else felt foreign to him. People watching his story now have started saying the obvious thing out loud, that he never grew up because he genuinely never got the chance to, and once he got older and finally had the freedom and the money to do something about it, he built himself a childhood instead of living one. That's the part that actually explains Neverland. The rides, the zoo, the constant presence of kids around him. It wasn't strange for the sake of being strange. It was a grown man trying to manually install the version of childhood that fame had taken from him at 5 years old. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Michael Jackson wasn't a musician anymore. Not really. He was an industry. him up, started treating him less like an artist worth protecting and more like an asset that needed to be managed or contained. Then came the legal battles. And this is not the kind of headline that just dents a reputation. This is the kind that consumes an entire life. Investigations. A home raided from top to bottom. Years spent inside courtrooms defending himself against accusations long before a real courtroom delivered one, in fact. And turns out you don't actually need to be guilty of anything for fame to flip into a system that profits off you regardless. It just needs you to be famous, fragile, and good for ratings. And for almost his entire adult life, Michael Jackson was exactly that. Here's the part of the Michael Jackson story that genuinely breaks the entire promise of fame. Because at the absolute height of his influence, more recognized worldwide than almost anyone in modern history, welcomed by presidents and prime ministers and royals wherever he landed, with entire cities reportedly declaring holidays the moment he touched down, Michael Jackson was, by his own account, completely alone. He said this himself, plainly, when people actually bothered to ask him directly. He couldn't walk through a public park like a normal person. He couldn't shop in a store without the entire place shutting down around him. And there's a clip of him literally trying to go shopping while a crowd of his own fans had to step in and physically shield him from photographers just so he could move 10 feet down a sidewalk. And the wild part is he wasn't even annoyed at the fans. He understood it. He just wanted to do something as basic as shop for a few minutes without it turning into an event. He couldn't sit in a club without his own songs coming over the speakers and the entire room turning into a performance he never agreed to give that night. He said it outright in one interview that wherever he went, it became work instead of pleasure, that people felt like they personally knew him because his face was on their wall and his music was in their house. So he had to perform back for them every single time, everywhere. And there was no version of his life where that ever switched. An ordinary afternoon. Rides. A zoo with giraffes and elephants. His own movie theater. A space where... And once he was old enough and rich enough to fix that himself, he basically built the childhood he was never given the first time around. And here's the part that makes the whole thing sadder the more you actually sit with it. Even inside his own private world, the fame, you genuinely can't always tell who's around you for you and who's around you for what you represent. Turns out being the most famous person alive has almost nothing to do with being the most free. In fact, it's closer to the exact opposite. The more eyes that were on him, the smaller his actual day-to-day life became. Until eventually it was just him, a tight inner circle, and a tour he was preparing for that he would never get to perform. He died at 50 years old in his own rented home in Los Angeles, after going into cardiac arrest, and the official cause that came out months later was an overdose of a powerful anesthetic called propofol, mixed with other sedatives, administered by his personal physician, who was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for it. A man surrounded, right up to his very last morning, by people whose entire job existed only because of how famous and how fragile his world had become by that point. So strip away the records, the headlines, the lawsuits, the costumes, that outlives Michael Jackson completely. What is fame even for? If the person living inside it never gets to have a normal life. Because here's the part people conveniently forget when they talk about how badly they wish they had his money or his fame. He didn't choose any of this at 5 years old. He didn't choose to become a global symbol before he was even old enough to understand what a symbol was. And by the time he was finally old enough to make his own choices, the machine around him was already running at full speed, with no real door out of it, because once the entire planet decides it owns a piece of you, there's no clean way to give that piece back. Michael Jackson didn't just live inside fame, he became the most complete example of it that the world has probably ever seen. Proof of exactly how high it completely it can empty one out while doing it. And the uncomfortable truth is, he's not actually a unique case. He's just the most extreme version of a story that keeps happening over and over again. to a new face every single decade, because the machine that built him and then slowly took everything from him never actually shut down after he died. It just moved on, quietly, looking for whoever's next.